I'm Leo, I'm 29, and for 11 years, my parents convinced me that I was responsible for my sister being in a wheelchair. Before I tell you how a single piece of paper blew my entire world apart, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories can reach. The drive home was on autopilot. My hands knew the turns, but my mind was miles away, still replaying the day's calls. A 12-hour shift as a paramedic is like a lifetime condensed into a single rotation of the clock. You see the beginning of life, the end of it, and all the messy, painful chaos in between. Today had been particularly brutal, a multi-car pileup on I-25 that looked like a scene from a disaster movie. By the time I clocked out, the exhaustion was more than just physical. It was a deep, spiritual weariness. All I craved was the quiet of my small basement room and a few hours of dreamless sleep to reset my soul. But silence wasn't on the menu tonight. The moment I pushed open the front door, the air in the house felt wrong. It was heavy, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. And there they were, arranged around the dining room table like a tribunal. My father, Richard, sat at the head, his back ramrod straight, his expression severe. He had perfected the look of righteous authority over the years. My mother, Helen, sat beside him, a portrait of fragile sorrow, a fresh tissue already clutched in her fist. And across from them, positioned so I had to face her directly, was my sister, Chloe. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed on the polished surface of the table, her expression a careful, practiced blank. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a summons. Leo, shut the door. Sit down, my father commanded. It wasn't a request. His voice had that flat, hard edge that permitted no argument. I let my worn-out backpack slide from my shoulder, the thud it made on the floor echoing in the tense silence. I navigated around the chairs and sank into the one they'd left empty for me. Felt like a defendant's chair. In the center of the table, illuminated by the harsh glare of the overhead light, was a stack of papers, neatly clipped together. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice gravelly with fatigue. "It's time we put a more permanent structure in place," my father said, using his fingers to push the documents across the table. They slid to a stop directly in front of me. "Your mother and I are not getting any younger. We need legal assurances that Chloe's future is secure." My eyes dropped to the cover page. The words, printed in a cold, black font, seemed to leap out at me. Caregiver agreement. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. My mother chose that moment to produce a soft, theatrical sniffle. "It's just a formality, sweetheart," she said, her voice wavering. "We know how much you love your sister. We know you'd never abandon her. This is just to protect her. To make sure she always has what she needs. To protect her." The words were a shield they used to hide the spear they were aiming at my heart. I lifted the cover page. The document was dense with legalese, a language designed to confuse and intimidate, but my eyes, trained to find critical details in a medical chart, snagged on the numbers. They were impossible to miss. "Shall liquidate in full all retirement accounts, including the 401k fund, valued at approximately $60,000, to be placed in the Chloe Reed Trust, a non-negotiable monthly contribution of $2,000, adjusted annually for inflation, shall assume sole and complete financial responsibility for all of Chloe Reed's medical, therapeutic, and residential needs for the duration of her natural life." The air I was trying to breathe seemed to turn to sand in my lungs. $60,000. It was every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every cheap meal I'd eaten to save a few bucks. $2,000 a month? That was more than half my paramedic salary. It was financial servitude. It was the rest of my life signed away on a piece of paper. "This is insane," I whispered, looking up. "I can't. This is everything I have." Chloe spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but carrying a sharp edge of manipulation. "It's okay, Mom. If Leo doesn't think I'm worth it, he doesn't have to." The words were a stiletto, sliding perfectly between my ribs. My father seized the opening. His eyes, cold and gray like a winter sky, narrowed. Worth it? This isn't about worth. This is about debt. A debt you incurred 11 years ago. Chloe doesn't get a future. She doesn't get to walk or run or dance. The least you can do is provide for the life you left her with. There it was, the foundational lie, the pillar of guilt upon which my entire adult life had been built. I need time, I said, my voice barely holding together. I pushed the papers back. My hands were trembling violently. Time is a luxury Chloe doesn't have. My mother snapped, her sorrowful mask dropping to reveal the steel beneath. You will sign this, Leo. Or do you want every person we know, every member of our church, to hear the story of how you left your crippled sister with nothing after you were the one who put her in that chair? The ultimatum was clear. My compliance or my character assassination. I stood up so fast the chair screeched against the hardwood floor. The sound was like a scream. I couldn't be in that room, couldn't breathe that poisoned air for another second. I'm not signing anything tonight, I managed to say. I turned and walked away, not to my room, but straight out the front door, slamming it behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. As I stood on the cold pavement under the dim glow of a streetlight, a single, terrifying thought broke through the fog of my exhaustion and grief. What if they're wrong? To understand the power they held over me, you have to understand the memory they curated. It wasn't a memory I possessed. It was a memory that possessed me. For 4,015 days, it woke with me, it went to work with me, and it was the last thing I saw before I fell into a restless sleep. Before the accident, Chloe and I were just brother and sister. I was 17, she was 14. I was obsessed with cars and getting my varsity letter in track. She was obsessed with boys, pop music, and the particular shade of her lip gloss. We fought over the TV remote and the last slice of pizza. We were normal. That normality seems like an impossible luxury now. A scene from someone else's life. The day it happened was a Tuesday in October, crisp and bright. I was a senior, full of the dumb, boundless confidence that comes with being 17. My main job, my one real responsibility in the world, was to pick Chloe up from the bus stop at 3:15 p.m. The stop was on the corner of Elm and 3rd, a sleepy intersection just a few blocks from our house. It was an easy gig. But that day I was distracted. I was leaning against my rusty but beloved Ford Escort in the school parking lot, talking to Jessica Miller. I'd had a crush on her since sophomore year, and she was finally, miraculously, talking to me. The conversation was clumsy and pointless, all about a history test we'd both taken, but I was hanging on every word. I was trying to be cool, to find the right moment to ask her to the homecoming dance. Time became elastic. A minute felt like a second. When she finally said goodbye and walked off with her friends, I felt a stupid grin spread across my face. I'd done it. I talked to her for a solid 10 minutes. I got in my car, feeling like a king, and glanced at the dashboard clock. 3:22 p.m. The triumph evaporated, replaced by a jolt of pure, cold panic. 7 minutes. I was 7 minutes late. I threw the car into drive, tires squealing as I peeled out of the parking lot. The short drive home felt like the longest of my life, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Please be there, please be there, please be there. I turned onto Elm Street, my eyes locked on the corner. The bus stop was empty, just a green bench and a lonely-looking trash can. My stomach twisted. I circled the block, then again, my panic climbing into my throat. Maybe she'd gotten tired of waiting and started walking. Maybe she was mad. I'd take anything over the cold dread that was starting to seep into my bones. That's when my phone rang, the cheap, tinny ringtone drilling into my brain. It was my mom. I flipped open my phone. Mom? I'm almost there. I can't find Seychelle. Her voice cut me off. It wasn't a voice. It was a shriek. A sound of pure, primal terror that severed something deep inside me. Leo, the hospital. It's Chloe. There's been an accident. The world went blurry after that. I remember the smell of burnt rubber as I slammed on the brakes in the hospital parking lot. I remember the slick, sterile feel of the linoleum floors under my sneakers. I remember seeing my parents standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room waiting area. Their faces were pale, shattered masks of grief. The moment my father saw me, his grief curdled into a white-hot rage. He crossed the space between us in 3 strides and grabbed the front of my jacket, slamming me against the wall. "Where were you?" he roared, his voice breaking. "Your one job. She was waiting for you at the bus stop. Your one damn job." My mother pulled him off, her own body racked with sobs. "A truck, Leo," she wept, her words fragmented and sharp. "A delivery truck. The driver had a seizure. He lost control, jumped the curb, right where she was standing. The paramedic said, if you had been on time, she would have been safe in the car. If you had been on time." That was the sentence. The one that became the architect of my life. In that moment, in the sterile, terrifying chaos of the hospital, they constructed my reality. I was the cause. My 7 minutes of flirting with Jessica Miller had been traded for my sister's ability to walk. The doctor came out later, a kind-looking man with tired eyes, and used clinical, devastating words. Severe T8 spinal cord injury. Complete paralysis from the waist down. Permanent. I didn't hear the medical terms. I only heard the clang of a prison door slamming shut. They had forged the bars of that prison with 4 words, "If you had been on time," and I had willingly walked inside. It was my fault. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name, and I would spend the rest of my life trying to atone for it. My life became an endless act of penance. The dreams I'd had for myself felt obscene in the face of Chloe's new reality. They were luxuries I hadn't earned. So, I began to dismantle my future, piece by piece, and offer it up on the altar of my guilt. The first major sacrifice was my college fund. My grandparents, after their funeral, had left a modest inheritance to be split between me and Chloe, specifically for our education. Mine was sitting in a savings account, about $20,000, earmarked for tuition at Colorado State. About 6 months after the accident, my father called me into his study. He didn't look at me. He was staring at a stack of invoices on his desk. "The renovations are going to be more than we thought," he said, his voice heavy. "The ramp for the front porch, gutting the bathroom for a roll-in shower, widening the doorways. Insurance covers some, but not all." He finally looked up, his eyes pinning me in place. "Your grandparents would have wanted us to use your education money for this, to give Chloe a comfortable life." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I remember the feel of the pen in my hand as I signed the withdrawal slip the next day at the bank. The teller, a cheerful woman who didn't know she was presiding over the funeral of my future, smiled and said, "Big plans." I just nodded, unable to speak. The money was gone, and with it, the vision of myself walking across a college campus faded to black. Instead of engineering, I chose a different path. I enrolled in a paramedic program at the local community college. It seemed fitting. A life spent responding to emergencies, trying to fix the broken bodies of strangers, because I had failed to protect my own sister. The job became my identity. The long hours, the low pay, the constant exposure to trauma, it all felt like a just punishment. My salary wasn't mine. It was a resource pool for the family. My paychecks were deposited directly into their joint account. It was easier that way, my mother had said. I never questioned it. The money was siphoned off for 1,000 different needs, real and imagined. A new van with a hydraulic lift, an experimental treatment in another state, a therapeutic hot tub for the backyard. Each expense was presented as absolutely vital for Chloe, and by extension, my responsibility. My personal life withered and died. I had been dating Sarah for almost a year. She was a nurse, she understood the demanding hours, and she was the first person who made me feel like I could be more than just a walking embodiment of guilt. One evening, she sat me down, her eyes shining with excitement. She'd been offered a huge promotion at a prestigious hospital in Seattle. "It's a nurse manager position, Leo," she'd said, grabbing my hands. "It's a huge step, and they have a great paramedic service there. We could get a place, start fresh." Together. It was a life raft, a chance at a real future. But all I could see was the chain anchoring me to the bottom of the ocean. I can't, I said, the words tasting like ash. My family, Chloe, they need me here. She tried to understand. They have your parents, Leo. You've given so much. You deserve a life of your own. I couldn't explain the depth of the obligation, the crushing weight of the guilt. It was a language she didn't speak. I ended it a week later. The pain in her eyes was a reflection of my own cowardice. She was the last serious relationship I ever had. I became a ghost in my own life. I was a machine that worked, earned money, and handed it over. At work, I once had a supervisor, a good man named Dave, who pulled me aside. Leo, you're one of my best medics. I'm putting you up for a supervisor promotion. There's more pay, better hours. You've earned it. The training was out of state for 6 weeks. 6 weeks away. It was an impossibility. I thanked him and told him I had too many family commitments to accept. The look of disappointment on his face was another small cut. Another piece of myself I had to sacrifice. Over the years, Chloe settled into her role as the tragic princess in the castle I was paying for. She never had to ask for anything. My parents did it for her. Her requests became more extravagant. Top-of-the-line electronics, designer clothes, food delivery from expensive restaurants. My life had shrunk so that hers could be comfortable. This went on for 11 years. 11 years of working, sacrificing, and atoning. I was so deep inside the prison of my own making that I had forgotten what the sun felt like. So when they pushed that legal agreement across the table, demanding I formalize my life sentence, they thought I was the same broken boy who had signed away his college fund all those years ago. They didn't realize that by pushing that hard, they weren't just tightening the chains. They were giving me the key. After storming out of the house, I just drove. I had no destination. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the neon sign buzzing and flickering in the dark. I sat there for an hour, the engine off, the silence inside the car a stark contrast to the screaming chaos in my head. The caregiver agreement was an escalation I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't enough that I had given them my youth, my dreams, my money. They wanted to own me, legally and irrevocably. My thumb hovered over the contact info for Maya Singh. She was my only real friend left from the before times. We didn't talk often, but when we did, it was like no time had passed. She was a lawyer now, a sharp, no-nonsense corporate attorney who negotiated multimillion-dollar deals. Calling her about my family drama felt like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. But the document on my parents' table felt like a sledgehammer aimed at my head. I finally made the call. She picked up, her voice instantly alert despite the late hour. Leo? What's wrong? The story came pouring out of me in a torrent of frustration and despair. The ambush at the dining table, the legal papers, the demand for my 401k, the monthly payments, the threats. I laid it all out, the ugly, humiliating truth of my life. When I was done, I expected her to say something comforting. Something like, "I'm so sorry, Leo, that's terrible." Instead, there was a long, unnerving silence on the other end of the line. "Maya," I finally asked, "did you hear me?" "I heard you," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Leo, I'm going to be blunt. This is not a family asking for help. This is a hostage situation, and you are the hostage. They had a lawyer draft this. I guess. It was full of legal terms I didn't understand." "Of course it was," she scoffed. "It was designed to intimidate you into signing your life away without a fight. Leo, you listen to me. Do not, under any circumstances, sign that piece of paper. Do you understand?" The familiar wave of guilt washed over me. "But Chloe, it's my fault, Maya. I have a responsibility to—" "Stop." She cut me off, her voice sharp. "Stop repeating the story they fed you. You were a 17-year-old kid who was 7 minutes late. What they have done to you, what they have extracted from you over the last decade, is 1,000 times more than any responsibility would require. This is exploitation." I was silent, stunned by the harshness of her words. No one had ever spoken about my situation like that. Let me tell you something about my own family, Maya said, her voice softening slightly. When my grandmother passed away, she left a small inheritance. My uncle, the executor, tried to cheat my mom out of her share. It got ugly. Lawyers, threats. It nearly tore the family apart. I learned a hard lesson then. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most willing to use love and obligation as a weapon. And the only defense is the cold, hard truth found in documents. Wills, contracts, police reports. She paused, letting the last two words hang in the air. Which brings me to my question, Leo. It might sound strange, but just humor me. Okay, in 11 years, through all of this, have you ever once laid eyes on the official police report from the day of the accident? The question landed with the force of a physical impact. It was so simple, so logical, yet it had never, ever occurred to me. The story was the story. My parents told it, the family believed it, and I lived it. Why would I ever need to see a piece of paper? No, I admitted, my mind reeling. Why would I? I know what happened. I was late. A truck driver had a seizure at the bus stop. That's the narrative, Maya said, her voice precise. It's the story that has served them very well for a very long time. But a police report isn't a story, Leo. It's a diagram. It's measurements. It's eyewitness statements taken moments after the event, before anyone has time to build a narrative. It's the closest thing to objective truth you can get. A crazy, terrifying thought began to form in my mind. What if the truth was different? What if the prison I'd been living in wasn't even real? You were 17 and in shock, she said gently. You accepted the version of events your grieving parents gave you. But you're not a kid anymore. And they're not just grieving parents. They're business partners trying to lock you into a predatory contract. You owe it to yourself to see the foundational document of your life sentence. My throat was tight. Maya, I said, the word barely a whisper. How do we find it? Don't worry about that, she replied, a new, steely determination in her voice. I'm your lawyer now. Let me handle it. When I hung up the phone, the chaos in my head had been replaced by a single, sharp point of focus. For the first time in 4,015 days, I wasn't looking back at my guilt. I was looking forward, towards a truth I wasn't even sure I could handle. The next few days were a masterclass in covert operations. I started living a double life. At home, I was a phantom. I'd slip out of the house for my shift before the sun was up and wouldn't return until long after my parents were in bed. I ate cheap food in my car and communicated with Maya through encrypted messaging apps. The house I grew up in no longer felt like home. It felt like enemy territory. My parents felt the shift in power and they didn't like it. The pleading voicemails from my mother started first. Leo, sweetheart, please call me. We can talk this out. We're all so worried about you. When that didn't work, the tone changed. Your father is beside himself with stress. You know his heart isn't what it used to be. Do you want to be responsible for making him ill? Then came the texts from my father, each one a little hammer of guilt. Chloe cried for an hour last night. She thinks you hate her. And when I didn't reply to that, your silence is tearing this family apart. A son's first duty is to his parents. He even brought up the possibility of a divorce, a threat so outlandish it was almost laughable. The stress you're putting on your mother and me. People get divorced over less. Each message was designed to reel me back in, to trigger the knee-jerk guilt that had been my operating system for a decade. But now, thanks to Maya, I had an antidote. Suspicion. Meanwhile, Maya was hitting one bureaucratic brick wall after another. Her first attempt at the city police records department was a flat-out denial. I was on the phone with some clerk named Henderson for 20 minutes, she told me during a hurried call while I was on my break. He said that since you weren't named in the report as an involved party, and since the victim is now an adult, Chloe herself would have to sign the release form. Or her legal guardians at the time of the incident, which would be Richard and Helen. So a dead end, I said, my hopes plummeting. Asking them for it would be like admitting we're investigating them. They'd lock it down forever. It's not a dead end, it's a detour, she corrected me, her voice firm. They're counting on you feeling powerless. That's how they've controlled you. But you're not powerless anymore. I decided to try a different approach. I took a day off and went down to the central precinct myself. I thought maybe a personal plea, the brother of the victim, might work. Didn't. I was met with the same bored, impenetrable wall of procedure. You need the proper forms, signed by an involved party. A woman behind a thick pane of glass told me, not even bothering to make eye contact. I left feeling defeated and foolish. That evening, I was ready to give up. Maybe it doesn't matter, Maya, I said to her over the phone, the exhaustion in my voice profound. Maybe I should just leave town, change my name. Don't you dare, she snapped, her voice fierce. That's exactly what they want. For you to run, for you to disappear. We're not running. We're fighting. I told you I had another idea, and it just paid off. I sat up straighter. What? My friend at the county courthouse, she said, a note of triumph in her voice. He's a records clerk. I had him search the archives not by name, but by date and type of incident. He found it. A major vehicle collision involving a minor on October 12th, 11 years ago. The report was filed, cross-referenced, and buried. He's emailing me a scanned copy. It should be in my inbox any minute now. My heart started to pound. This was it. The moment of truth. I'm sending it to you as soon as I get it, she said. Leo, whatever it says, we'll deal with it together. Okay? Okay. I managed to breathe out. I hung up and stared at my phone, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. The screen was dark, but to me it felt like a bomb, counting down to 0. A notification pinged. An email from Maya. The subject line was a single word, truth. I tapped it open. There, attached, was a single PDF file. The key to my past, and the wrecking ball for my future. I couldn't open it. Not there, not in my car, not in the sterile anonymity of a parking lot. This moment felt too monumental. I texted Maya 2 words. The Grindstone. It was a 24-hour coffee shop we used to study at in high school. A place filled with ghosts of a happier time. On my way, she replied instantly. I walked into the Grindstone and the smell of burnt coffee and old books hit me with a wave of nostalgia. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth in the darkest corner of the place. My hands were shaking, my leg bouncing a frantic rhythm under the table. I felt like I was waiting for a diagnosis. Maya arrived a few minutes later. She wasn't smiling. She looked like a soldier heading into battle. She slid into the seat across from me, her eyes searching mine. You haven't looked at it yet, she stated. It wasn't a question. I shook my head, sliding my phone across the scratched surface of the table. I feel like I'm going to throw up. You read it. Just tell me what it says. She nodded grimly and pulled the phone towards her. With a tap, the PDF opened. The first page was a blur of boxes and official letterhead. She scanned it quickly, her legal training allowing her to parse the information with an efficiency I couldn't muster. Her expression remained neutral, a professional mask. She swiped to the second page. This was the narrative, the summary written by the responding officer, Sergeant Miller. I watched her face like a hawk. I saw her eyebrows draw together in a tight line. I saw her lean imperceptibly closer to the screen. And then I saw it. A tiny, sharp intake of breath. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, lifted from the screen and met mine. The professional mask was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated shock. Oh my God, Leo, she whispered, her voice tight. You're not going to believe this. Just tell me. I rasped, my throat feeling like it was closing up. She took a centering breath, then looked back at the report. Okay, fact 1. The accident did not happen at the bus stop on Elm Street. The words didn't compute. What? That's impossible. That's where she was. No, Maya said, shaking her head, her eyes glued to the screen. According to the report, the location of the incident was the intersection of Jefferson Avenue and the 9th Street overpass. That has to be 4 miles from your old high school. The coffee shop seemed to warp around me, the edges of my vision blurring. For miles. It made no sense. Why? Why would she have been there? Maya's gaze continued down the page. She began to read aloud, her voice steady but laced with disbelief. Vehicle 1, a 2008 Suzuki GSXR motorcycle, registered to and operated by Mr. Kyle Vance, age 18, was traveling eastbound on Jefferson Avenue at a high rate of speed. Vehicle 2, a commercial box truck, was traveling northbound on 9th Street, proceeding on a green light signal. Kyle Vance. The name was like a ghost from another lifetime. A senior when I was a sophomore. Leather jacket, cocky smile. Chloe had been infatuated with him. My parents had despised him, called him a degenerate. There's more, Maya said, her voice dropping. Multiple witness statements confirm Vehicle 1 accelerated to proceed through a red light signal. Vehicle 1 entered the intersection and was struck on the passenger side by Vehicle 2. A red light, not a freak seizure. A choice. A reckless, stupid choice. My hands were flat on the table, my knuckles white. I was trying to anchor myself to reality. And Chloe? Maya's eyes softened with pity. She took another breath before continuing. A passenger on Vehicle 1, identified by the operator as Ms. Chloe Reed, age 14, was ejected upon impact. The operator, Mr. Vance, sustained a compound fracture of the left femur. The passenger, Ms. Reed. She hesitated. Read it, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The passenger, Ms. Reed, sustained catastrophic trauma to the thoracic spine. Officer noted at the scene that neither the operator nor the passenger were wearing protective helmets. That was it. The final, devastating piece. A motorcycle. Kyle Vance. Running a red light. No helmet. The entire, elaborate story that had been the cornerstone of my life. The bus stop, the truck jumping the curb, my tardiness being the cause, was a complete and utter fabrication. Chloe wasn't a passive victim waiting for her brother. She had skipped the bus. She had lied to our parents. She had gotten on the back of a motorcycle with a boy she was forbidden to see and made a series of choices that led to her own ruin. And me? My 7 minutes? They were meaningless. Coincidence. I was a footnote in a story I'd been forced to star in. I wasn't the cause. I wasn't even there. A strangled sound clawed its way out of my throat. It was a sob, but it was filled with a decade of repressed rage. The immense, crushing weight of guilt I had carried for 4,015 days didn't just lift. It shattered. It had never been mine to carry. It was a phantom weight they had strapped to my back. I dropped my head into my hands as the tears finally broke free. Hot, bitter tears. Not of sorrow for Chloe, but of fury at my parents. They had stood in that hospital, looked at their broken, terrified son, and made a decision. They had chosen to bury the truth of their daughter's rebellion and my innocence and, in its place, construct a lie that would benefit them. They hadn't just let me believe a falsehood. They had actively, maliciously sentenced me to a prison of guilt to serve their own narrative. And I had been their model prisoner for 11 years. What do I do now? I asked Maya, my voice muffled by my hands. She reached across the table and put her hand on my arm. Now, she said, her voice filled with a cold fury I'd never heard before. Now we burn it all to the ground. The rage was a clean, purifying fire. It burned away all the doubt, all the sadness, all the years of feeling less than. For the first time in my adult life, I felt a sense of profound clarity. I knew my parents had lied. I knew Chloe had lied. But I needed to hear it. I needed to look the other participant in the eye and see the truth for myself. Took me less than an hour to find Kyle Vance. The internet never forgets. He owned a custom motorcycle shop on the south side of town. A gritty, industrial area that smelled like welding fumes and old oil. When I walked in, the loud roar of an engine being tested died down. A man in greasy overalls emerged from behind a bike lift, wiping his hands on a red rag. The cocky 18-year-old was gone. This man was in his early 30s, with tired lines around his eyes and the quiet competence of someone who works with his hands. He looked at me, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face, quickly followed by a deep, weary caution. Leo Reed, he said. It wasn't a question. Damn. I guess I always knew you'd show up here one day. We need to talk, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. About October 12th. 11 years ago. He didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, a deep sigh escaping his lips. Yeah, I figured. Come on back to the office. It's a mess, but it's private. He led me to a small, cluttered room that was more of a storage closet with a desk in it. He slumped into the chair behind the desk, and it squeaked in protest. He gestured for me to take the only other chair, a wobbly stool. So you know, he said, staring at a calendar on the wall. You found the report. I did, I confirmed. Now I want to hear it from you. Everything. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't malice or defiance. It was a deep, abiding shame. We were kids, man, he began, his voice raspy. Just monumentally stupid kids. Chloe. She was something else. Fearless. Always pushing boundaries. She hated how strict your parents were. That morning, she texted me. Said she was going to tell your folks she was taking the bus. But she wanted me to pick her up a few streets over from the school. We were just going to go to a buddy's house, listen to music. Nothing crazy. He shook his head, lost in the memory. She loved my bike. She said it was the only time she felt free. I had an extra helmet for her. I always did. I told her to put it on. She just laughed. It'll mess up my hair. Kyle, I have to look good for the party this weekend. What a stupid reason to ruin your life. The casual vanity of that detail sent a fresh wave of anger through me. We were running late, he went on, his gaze dropping to his grease-stained hands. I was speeding, trying to show off, probably. The light at Jefferson turned yellow. I made a split-second, idiotic decision to gun it instead of braking. The next thing I remember is the sound of metal screaming and then just pain, waking up on the pavement. He paused, collecting himself. The first people I saw in my hospital room, after my own parents, were yours. Your dad looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. He looked like he wanted to physically tear me apart. Your mom. She was worse. She was just cold, empty. Chloe was already in surgery. They knew it was bad. What did you tell them? I asked, my voice low. The truth, he said, his voice cracking. Every last bit of it. That Chloe called me. That she skipped the bus. That I was speeding, ran the light, that she wasn't wearing a helmet. I owned all of it. I was terrified I was going to prison. He took a deep, shaky breath. And then your mother did something I will never forget. She put her hand on my arm. Her touch was icy. She looked at your dad. A silent conversation passed between them, and then she looked back at me. Her voice was flat, no emotion at all. She said, "That's not what happened. What happened was a tragic, unavoidable accident. A truck driver had a medical emergency at the bus stop where Chloe was waiting for her brother. That's the story. It's cleaner. It protects Chloe's memory from the slander of her own recklessness. Do you understand me?" My blood turned to ice. A conspiracy, hatched right there in the hospital room. Your dad chimed in, Kyle continued. It's better for everyone, son. My boy was late. It's his burden to bear. They weren't just creating a story. They were assigning a villain. And it was you. And you went along with it, I stated, the accusation hanging in the air. He finally looked me square in the eye, the shame in his own overwhelming. Yeah, I did. I was an 18-year-old coward. My parents had already hired a lawyer who told me to say as little as possible. Your parents' story, it saved me. It turned me from a reckless kid facing felony charges into a secondary victim of a freak accident. All it cost was you. I've lived with that choice every single day for 11 years, Leo. Knowing what they did to you, knowing I let them. I stood up from the wobbly stool. The office suddenly felt too small to contain my rage. Leo, wait, he said, his voice pleading. For what it's worth. I am so sorry. I didn't even look back at him. Sorry doesn't buy back a decade of a man's life, I said, and walked out of the garage, leaving him alone with his ghosts. I had my own to confront. The confirmation from Kyle Vance cemented the what and the how. But I was still haunted by the why. Why would two parents do something so monstrous to their own son? Was it truly just a split-second decision made in a moment of grief and panic? Or was it something colder, something more calculated? There was only one person left who might know. My Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister. She was a gentle soul, always on the periphery of our family's dramas, often looking on with a sad, knowing silence. In the past, I'd mistaken her quiet sympathy for me as simple kindness. Now I suspected it was guilt. I called her and asked if she could meet for lunch. Her hesitation on the phone was palpable, but she agreed. We met at a nondescript diner halfway between our houses. She looked older than I remembered, the lines of worry etched deeper around her eyes. I didn't waste time with small talk. After the waitress took our order, I slid a printed copy of the police report across the table. She stared at it, her hand trembling as she reached for her water glass. She didn't need to read it. She just looked at the official heading and her face crumpled. A single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. In my heart, I always knew the story was wrong. "What did you know, Aunt Carol?" I pressed gently. "You were at the hospital that day. What did you see?" She took a long, shaky breath, gathering her courage. "It was chaos, Leo. Everyone was frantic. Richard was shouting at the nurses. Helen was catatonic. I remember I went to the cafeteria to get a cup of coffee, just to escape the tension for a minute. When I was walking back, I passed by that little family consultation room. The door was closed, but not fully latched." She paused, her eyes distant, reliving the moment. I heard their voices inside, Richard and Helen. They thought they were alone, and the things they were saying, it wasn't grief, Leo. It was damage control. My hands clenched into fists under the table. Richard was pacing. I could hear his footsteps. He was furious, but not with a truck driver. He was furious with Chloe. He said, "She's ruined us. A rebellious 14-year-old. Sneaking off with that degenerate on a motorcycle. What will people at the church think? This will be a stain on our family forever." It was exactly as Kyle had described. It was all about appearances. "And then your mother—" "Oh, Leo, your mother's voice," Carol said, shaking her head in disbelief. "It was the scariest thing I've ever heard. It was completely void of emotion. Pure ice." She said, "Stop being a fool, Richard. No one needs to know the truth. The truth is messy. The story is what matters." She was the one who came up with it. All of it. The bus stop, the truck driver's seizure. "And you." Aunt Carol started to cry softly. She said, "Leo was late. It's his fault. It's a simple, tragic story. Chloe becomes a perfect victim, not a delinquent. We become grieving parents. And Leo will carry the burden. He's strong. He can take it. It was a business decision, Leo. They were choosing the narrative that best protected their social standing. The clinical coldness of it stole my breath." "It got worse," Carol whispered, leaning closer. "A few years later, after my own mother, your grandmother, passed away, there was the inheritance. It was supposed to be a trust for you and Chloe. But I saw their bank statements by accident once. A huge chunk of that money, right after the funeral, went straight to a down payment on their new luxury SUV. They told everyone you had insisted they have a reliable car for hospital runs. They were using your guilt to finance their lifestyle." I just sat there, the diner's cheerful background music a sickening counterpoint to the horror of her words. It wasn't a lie born of panic. It was a conspiracy, a premeditated, long-term plan to sacrifice my life for their comfort and reputation. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, the question laced not with accusation, but with a deep, hollow sadness. She looked at me, her eyes swimming with a lifetime of regret. "I was afraid, Leo," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Helen, she can be ruthless. She would have cut me out of the family, turned everyone against me. I was a coward, and I have been ashamed of that cowardice every single day for 11 years. I am so sorry." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "You're not a coward, Aunt Carol," I said. "You're telling me now, and that's all that matters." Armed with the truth, I made my move. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was quiet and absolute. I went to a new bank, opened a new checking account, and redirected my direct deposit. I let my parents' joint account, the one my salary had been feeding for a decade, run dry. Then I blocked their numbers. I blocked my father, my mother, and even Chloe. I erected a wall of silence. It took them less than a week to realize their cash flow had been cut off. The war began. The first salvo was a registered letter that arrived at my apartment. The envelope was thick and expensive, the return address a prestigious downtown law firm. Inside, a letter from Patricia Lambert, SQ, was written in language so cold and threatening it seemed to emanate a chill. It was a formal demand letter, outlining my moral and financial obligations and threatening immediate legal action if I did not sign the previously discussed caregiver agreement and reinstate the agreed-upon financial support. I took a photo of it and sent it to Maya. Her reply was a single smiling devil emoji. "They're panicking," she texted. "They're firing cannons without any gunpowder. Ignore it." But they weren't content to fight a legal battle they knew they couldn't win. They decided to come after my life, my reputation, my very ability to earn a living. I was in the middle of a shift, cleaning and restocking the ambulance after a particularly nasty call, when my station captain, Dave, approached me. He was the same man who had offered me a promotion years ago. He had a grim look on his face. "Leo, Dr. Evans wants to see you. Hospital director's office." Now, my stomach turned to a block of ice. The director's office? That was reserved for the worst kind of trouble. I walked through the hospital corridors, my boots echoing ominously. The familiar smells of antiseptic and floor wax suddenly felt alien and hostile. When I entered the plush office, Dr. Evans was there, sitting behind his large mahogany desk. With him were a stern-looking woman I recognized from Human Resources and my captain, Dave, who stood uncomfortably by the door. "Leo, please have a seat," Dr. Evans said, his voice carefully neutral. "We've received a very serious allegation against you." He folded his hands on the desk. "Earlier today, I received a personal call from your mother, Helen Reed." He paused, his eyes gauging my reaction. She was quite distraught. "She claimed to be calling out of grave concern for you. She said that you are under extreme financial duress, and that she has reason to believe you have been stealing fentanyl and morphine from the ambulance's medical supply to sell on the street." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. Of all the things I had imagined they would do, this was beyond the pale. This wasn't just a lie. It was a tactical nuke aimed at the heart of my career. In my line of work, trust isn't just important. It's everything. An accusation of drug diversion, even the hint of it, is a professional death sentence. My voice, when I finally found it, was a raw whisper. "That is the most insane, despicable lie I have ever heard." The HR woman, whose name tag read Melissa, spoke up, her tone clinical and detached. "We have a zero-tolerance policy, Mr. Reed. Any such accusation must be investigated to the fullest extent. We will be conducting a complete audit of your ambulance's controlled substance logs for the past 6 months. Until that investigation is complete, you are placed on mandatory, unpaid administrative leave." Unpaid. They were trying to starve me out. "You'll need to turn in your badge and your access keys," Melissa continued, gesturing to a small plastic tray on the desk. The humiliation was a physical thing. It felt like being stripped naked in front of them. I unclipped my badge from my uniform. I pulled the keys from my pocket. The small clatter they made as I dropped them into the tray was the sound of my life's work being put on hold, possibly forever. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. Dr. Evans finally looked me in the eye. "For the record, Leo," he said, his voice low, "you've been a model paramedic for 10 years. I hope to God your mother is wrong." I just nodded, unable to speak. I walked out of that office, out of the hospital, and into the parking lot. They hadn't just attacked me. They had used the very system I had dedicated my life to as their weapon. This was no longer just about exposing a lie. This was about survival. The 3 days of my suspension were the longest of my life. I sat in my small apartment, the silence buzzing with anxiety. My career, the one part of my life I had built for myself, was hanging by a thread, and it was all because of a vicious, calculated lie from my own mother. On the 4th day, my phone rang. It was Dr. Evans. "Leo," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "The audit is complete. Every single microgram of every controlled substance you've ever signed out is perfectly accounted for. Your logs are immaculate. There is not a shred of evidence to support the accusation." A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. "So, I'm cleared. You are completely and fully cleared," he confirmed. "Frankly, what your mother did is tantamount to filing a false police report. It's despicable. Please take another few days off on us. Your job is safe here." I thanked him, my voice thick with emotion. Their most powerful weapon had misfired. They had tried to ruin me and they had failed. But I knew this wasn't the end. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. Their next attack wouldn't be a covert phone call. It would be a public execution. The summons came 2 days later, not from a lawyer, but from my Aunt Grace, my mother's sister and most loyal lieutenant. Her text message was deceptively casual. "Hi, sweetie. The whole family is getting together at your parents' house this Sunday at 2 p.m. We really need to talk about this situation with you and Chloe and get it sorted out. It's so important that you're there. Please come." I didn't need a law degree to translate that. It wasn't a family get-together. It was an ambush, a tribunal. They were going to put me on trial in front of the entire family, paint me as the villain, and use social pressure and emotional blackmail to break me once and for all. I forwarded the message to Maya. Her response was immediate. "It's a trap, and you are going to walk right into it." "Are you crazy?" I texted back. "No, I'm a lawyer," she replied. "They've created the stage, the audience, and the narrative. They feel powerful, they feel in control. We are going to use their own stage to burn down their entire production. But you can't go in alone. And you can't go in empty-handed." Over the next 2 days, we prepared for war. Maya organized the evidence into a devastatingly clear presentation. Ben Carter, the journalist, finalized his report on my parents' finances, tracing the lines from my inheritance and salary directly to their lavish expenditures. And I made one last, difficult phone call. To Aunt Carol. Sunday afternoon was gray and cold, a perfect reflection of my mood. As I drove to my parents' house, the house that had once been my home and was now my battlefield, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. For 11 years, they had written my story. Today, I was taking back the pen. I walked through the front door and into the living room. It was packed. A silent, hostile jury of my own relatives. My father and mother stood by the fireplace, the picture of aggrieved parenthood. Chloe was positioned next to them, her expression downcast. Uncle Robert was there, looking stern. Aunt Grace gave me a sad, pitying look. And to complete the spectacle, they had brought in the heavy artillery. Pastor Evans from their church, flanked by 2 solemn-looking elders. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to me. The weight of their collective judgment was a physical force. My father stepped forward, assuming the role of prosecutor. "Leo, thank you for finally gracing us with your presence," he began, his voice resonating with patriarchal authority. "We are all here today not out of anger, but out of love. We are here to intervene, to save you from a path of bitterness and selfishness that is destroying this family." He launched into a grand, sweeping performance. He spoke of sacrifice, of duty, of the sacred bond of family. He twisted my 11 years of service into a simple obligation, and my recent rebellion into a shocking betrayal. My mother then took the stage, her voice trembling artfully. "We don't understand what's happened to you, Leo," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "You were always such a good boy, such a wonderful brother. Now you abandon your sister, you ignore your parents. All we are asking for is this," she said, holding up a copy of the caregiver agreement. A simple promise on paper that you will continue to do what you've always done. That you will care for the sister you promised to protect. They had set the scene perfectly. I was the cold, ungrateful son, the heartless brother, the prodigal who had strayed. They had the law, family, and God all seemingly on their side. They looked at me, expecting me to break, to beg for the forgiveness they were so magnanimously prepared to offer, once I'd signed on the dotted line. They had no idea the trial they had arranged was about to be turned on its head. My father delivered his closing statement with the flourish of a seasoned trial lawyer. So, Leo, the choice is yours. Are you a part of this family with all the responsibilities that entails? Or are you an outsider? Sign the agreement. Do the right thing. End this madness. The room was utterly silent. The air crackled with anticipation. 30 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, waiting for my surrender. I let the silence stretch, meeting my father's gaze without flinching. Then, I took a slow, deliberate breath. No, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. I will not be signing the agreement, and I'm not the one who needs an intervention today. A murmur of shock rippled through the room. My father's face, which had been a mask of righteous authority, began to tighten with rage. What did you just say to me? You heard me, I said calmly. You've all heard one side of a very carefully constructed story tonight. Now you're going to hear the truth. Just as my father was about to explode, the front door opened. It hadn't been fully latched. Maya Singh walked in, her expression cool and professional, carrying a briefcase. She was followed by Ben Carter, the journalist, holding a slim laptop. And walking timidly but resolutely behind them was Aunt Carol. The entire dynamic of the room shifted in a heartbeat. It was no longer a family intervention. It was an armed negotiation. My parents stared at the newcomers, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. What is this? My mother demanded, her voice shrill. Who are these people? This is a private family matter. It stopped being a private matter when you drafted a legal document and tried to destroy my career, I said. This is Maya Singh, my lawyer. This is Ben Carter, an investigative journalist. And you all know Aunt Carol. Ben Carter moved with quiet efficiency. He walked to the large flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace, connected his laptop with an HDMI cable, and the screen blinked to life. My father started to protest. I want you all out of my house now. I don't think you do, Richard, Maya said, her voice dripping with ice. I think you're going to want to sit down and watch the show. The first document that flashed on the screen was the police report. The heading, City of Denver Police Department Traffic Accident Report, was stark and undeniable. I let the image hang there for a moment, watching as my relatives leaned forward, squinting, their brows furrowed in confusion. What is this nonsense? Uncle Robert demanded. We all know what happened. Do you? I asked. Then please, read the location of incident field for me. There was a moment of silence, then a gasp from one of my aunts. It says, Jefferson Avenue and 9th Street. Correct, I said. Not the bus stop on Elm Street. Now, look at the vehicles involved section. Another murmur went through the room as they read the words, Suzuki motorcycle and Kyle Vance. These are lies. Forgeries, my father bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. They're certified public records, Maya stated calmly. But if you doubt the report, perhaps you'll believe a direct confession. Ben clicked a mouse and the screen changed to an audio player. He hit play. The frightened, regretful voice of an 18-year-old Kyle Vance, recorded just days ago, filled the dead-silent living room. Every person in that room heard him detail the plan to skip the bus, the ride, the plea from Chloe not to wear a helmet. And then came the kill shot, his account of the conversation in the hospital. And then your mom. She looked at me and said, That's not what happened. A truck driver had a medical emergency. It's a much better story. Aunt Grace let out a strangled cry and put her hand over her mouth. Pastor Evans looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. A better story, I repeated, my voice shaking with the fury of 11 years of injustice. A story paid for with my entire adult life. A story paid for with my college fund. My salary. Even the inheritance from my own grandmother, which you used to buy yourselves a new car. On cue, Ben switched the display again. Now, it was a series of bank statements. Deposits from my paramedic paycheck. A large withdrawal from the inheritance trust account. And then, the corresponding credit card statements. Thousands of dollars for a Hawaiian cruise. $5,000 at a luxury furniture store. The $20,000 down payment on a brand new SUV. The financial trail was a brutal, undeniable map of their greed and my sacrifice. The final piece of the puzzle was Aunt Carol. She stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "It's all true," she said, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. "I was there, at the hospital. I heard them. I heard Helen and Richard decide to blame Leo. They were worried about their reputation. They chose to sacrifice their son to protect their image. I have lived with the shame of my silence for 11 years. I will not be silent anymore." The foundation of their world had been demolished. The jury they had assembled had turned on them. All eyes in the room, accusing, disgusted, horrified, were now fixed on my parents. But the final, devastating blow came from the wheelchair. Chloe, who had been silent and shrinking throughout the presentation, finally broke. Her face, white and streaked with tears, lifted to meet mine. "He's telling the truth," she sobbed, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and misery. "All of it. I didn't want to get in trouble for sneaking out. I was scared. They told me it would be okay. They told me Leo would take care of everything. They told me to be quiet. I'm sorry, Leo. I'm so sorry." The confession, raw and absolute, sucked the last remaining air out of the room. My parents didn't move. They just stood there, exposed, humiliated, and utterly defeated in the ruins of the lies they had built. This was the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me this far. You're amazing. Please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below, so I know you've been with me on this journey. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of my journey. The implosion was immediate and catastrophic. The living room, which had been a courtroom just moments before, descended into chaos. Uncle Robert, a man who valued family honor above all else, was staring at his brother Richard with a look of such profound contempt I thought he might actually strike him. "You did this to your own son?" he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "For what? For appearances? Have you no shame?" Aunt Grace, always my mother's defender, was sobbing uncontrollably, not in sympathy for her sister, but in horror at her deception. "How could you, Helen? How could you let us all believe that lie? We judged him. We pitied you." Pastor Evans, looking utterly shell-shocked, approached my father. "Richard," he said, his voice heavy with condemnation, "this is a deception of the highest order. You have used your own church community to perpetuate a lie. You have brought shame upon this house." My parents stood frozen in the eye of the hurricane they had created. Their power, built on a foundation of secrets and manipulation, had crumbled to dust in a matter of minutes. They had no defense, no explanation. The evidence was absolute. And then, in the vacuum of their defeat, they did the one thing they had left to do. They turned on each other. "This was your brilliant idea," Richard snarled at my mother, his voice a venomous whisper that was somehow louder than the shouting. "Your precious Chloe couldn't be seen as a tramp. You were obsessed with her reputation. And you were terrified the men at your golf club would find out your daughter was a reckless little fool." She shot back, her voice like cracking ice. "Don't you dare lay this at my feet. You were the one who enjoyed the cruises. You drove the brand new car." Watching them, I felt nothing. No pity, no lingering anger, not even satisfaction. It was like observing two venomous creatures that I had just been freed from, watching them turn their poison on each other. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were just furious that their perfect, profitable arrangement had come to an end. People began to leave, filing out of the house as if fleeing a contaminated zone. They offered me quiet apologies, looks of deep sympathy, but I barely registered them. My focus was on the door, on the fresh air outside. I walked out of that house without looking back. Maya, Ben, and Aunt Carol followed. As the cool afternoon air hit my face, I felt the last 11 years slew off me like a heavy, suffocating coat. Aunt Carol came up and gave me a fierce hug. "You were so brave," she whispered. I just nodded, too emotionally hollowed out to form words. I had won. But the victory felt less like a celebration and more like the quiet, desolate peace of a battlefield after the war is finally over. I heard through Aunt Carol that my parents sold the house less than a month later. They moved to a small town in a different state, seeking the anonymity they had once so desperately tried to avoid. They vanished from my life as completely as if they had never existed. It was the kindest thing they ever did for me. A week after the confrontation, after the dust had settled and the silence in my life had begun to feel like peace instead of emptiness, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. It was Chloe. Her voice was frail, stripped of all its former entitlement. "Leo, can we please talk? Just once." I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a small, quiet park with benches overlooking a duck pond. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting in her wheelchair near the water's edge. She looked smaller, diminished, without our parents flanking her like royal guards. The moment I sat down on the bench, the apologies began. A long, rambling monologue filled with tears and self-pity. It was all about how she was only 14, how she was so scared, how Mom and Dad had convinced her it was the only way, how she had just gone along with it. I let her speak until she had exhausted herself. I listened, not with sympathy, but with the clinical detachment of a doctor assessing a wound. When she finally fell silent, sniffling, she looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, waiting for the absolution I had always given her. This time she wouldn't get it. "I hear you, Chloe," I said, my voice calm and steady. "But I don't accept your apology. Not yet." Her face fell. "What? But I'm sorry." "Being sorry is a feeling," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "Amends are an action, and you have 11 years of actions to account for. You weren't 14 forever. You were 15, and 16, and 20, and 25. Every single day, for over 4,000 days, you woke up and made the choice to continue the lie. You watched me give up my future. You cashed the checks from my suffering, and you never said a word. The truth was brutal, and I saw it land. Each word was a necessary cut, excising the diseased part of our relationship. You didn't just go along with it, Chloe, I continued. You benefited from it. You got to be the perfect, tragic princess, shielded from all consequences. You never had to face what you did. You never had to grow up. That ends today. The tears streaming down her face were different now. They weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of dawning, painful understanding. "I am not your caretaker anymore," I said, drawing the boundary that should have been drawn a decade ago. "I am not your bank account. I am not your source of absolution. I am your brother, and I will always love the memory of the sister I had. But the woman sitting in front of me is a stranger, and I don't owe a stranger my life." I stood up. "I need time. A lot of it. You need to build a life for yourself now, a real one, based on truth. And so do I. Maybe many years from now we can find our way back to each other. But the path there is one you have to walk alone." I turned and walked away, the sound of her quiet sobbing following me for a few steps before it was lost in the breeze. It was the cruelest and kindest thing I had ever done. I was finally completely free. The world after the war was quiet. It was a silence that was initially unsettling. For 11 years, my life had been defined by noise. The constant hum of my parents' demands, the siren of my job, the screaming guilt in my own head. Now there was just stillness. The first tangible step into my new life was enrolling at the state university. I walked into the admissions office, a 29-year-old man with a decade of trauma behind him, and declared my intention to follow the pre-med track. The admissions counselor, a kind woman half my age, looked at my paramedic certifications and my story and saw not an obstacle, but an asset. I was accepted. Walking onto campus that first semester was a surreal experience. I was surrounded by bright-eyed 18-year-olds complaining about 8 a.m. classes and stressing over midterms. I should have felt like an old man, an outsider. Instead, I felt like I was finally home. Sitting in a massive lecture hall for my first chemistry class, the professor's voice explaining atomic bonds washing over me, I felt a sense of purpose that was entirely my own. It wasn't penance. It was passion. Of course, freedom wasn't a magic pill. The chains of guilt, even when broken, leave marks. I started seeing a therapist, a smart, empathetic man named Dr. Allen. In our weekly sessions, I began the painstaking work of dismantling the psychological prison my parents had built for me. They performed a kind of emotional theft, Leo, he explained one session. They stole your narrative, your youth, and your sense of self-worth. Our job is to help you reclaim those things. He helped me understand that their actions weren't born of love or grief, but of a deep-seated narcissism. They needed a world where they were the noble, suffering parents and Chloe was the blameless victim. My role as the guilty party was simply a casting choice that made their story work. Understanding this, truly internalizing it, was a painful but liberating process. I learned to live for myself. It was a skill I had to acquire from scratch. I learned that I enjoyed cooking, that I was terrible at it at first, but got better. I learned that I loved hiking in the foothills on weekends, the physical exertion a welcome change from mental exhaustion. I went on a few dates, clumsy and awkward at first, but for the first time, I could talk about my future without a giant, unspoken, but attached to it. My life began to fill up with my own choices. The books I read, the food I ate, the friends I made in my study groups. Each small decision was an act of rebellion against my past, an assertion of my own identity. The money I earned from a part-time job at the university library felt more valuable than any paramedic paycheck ever had, because it was mine. I was building a new foundation, not on a lie, but on the solid ground of my own hard-won truth. For the better part of a year, I had no contact with Chloe. Aunt Carol was my only source of information, providing brief, occasional updates. Chloe's transition into the real world was a brutal one. Without my parents to cater to her every whim and my money to fund it, she was thrown into the labyrinthine world of social services and disability benefits. She had to learn to budget a small monthly check. She had to learn to navigate the city's paratransit system, to schedule her own doctor's appointments, to fight for the resources she was entitled to. For the first time in her life, she had no one to blame and no one to rescue her. She was forced to confront the consequences not just of the accident, but of her own passivity and complicity in the lie. According to Carol, it was a rocky and often painful process, filled with frustration and setbacks. But slowly, painstakingly, she was learning to be self-sufficient. Then, about 10 months after our last conversation, Carol sent me a link without any comment. It was to a personal blog, crudely designed but functional. The blog's title was Wheeling Forward. It was Chloe's. I hesitated for a long time before clicking. I braced myself for more excuses, more blame-shifting. But what I found was something else entirely. The first post was titled, "The Truth Cost Me Everything, and Gave Me Myself." In it, she told the story. Not my parents' version, but the real one. She wrote about her own teenage vanity, her recklessness, her fear. She didn't spare herself. She owned her choices. Then she wrote about the lie, about her silent complicity, about watching me sacrifice my life while she remained quiet. For 11 years, she wrote, I was a passenger in a life someone else was driving. First, it was Kyle's motorcycle. Then, it was my parents' lie. I was always being carried along, never steering. The truth finally forced me to take the wheel. It's terrifying and I crash a lot. But for the first time, I'm the one driving. I read through the archives. She wrote about the daily indignities and triumphs of navigating the world in a wheelchair. She wrote about learning to cook for herself, about finding a community of other people with spinal cord injuries, about her dream of becoming a disability advocate. It was raw, honest, and stripped of all self-pity. She never used my name. I was always my brother. But the entire blog felt like a long public apology, not just in words, but in actions. She wasn't just saying she was sorry. She was living a life that proved it. On my 30th birthday, a small package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a framed photo. It was an old one taken years before the accident. Me, about 10 years old, and Chloe, a gap-toothed 7, sitting on a swing set, laughing. Tucked into the frame was a small, handwritten note. "I know I can't give you back the years we lost," it read, "but I want to remember the time when we were just us. Happy birthday, Leo. I hope you're happy. You've earned it more than anyone I know. Chloe." I placed the photo on my bookshelf. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. It was an acknowledgement. A fragile, tentative first step on a long road back to something that might one day look like family. Today, as I stand here talking to you, I'm halfway through my 3rd year of medical school. The hours are long, the work is grueling, but it's a good kind of tired. It's the exhaustion that comes from building something, not from being hollowed out. When I put on my white coat for rounds at the hospital, I feel a sense of rightness, of purpose, that my old paramedic uniform, worn as a hair shirt of guilt, never could have given me. I no longer think of my parents with anger. I mostly don't think of them at all. They are characters in a story from a book I've already finished. To forgive them would require them to be people capable of remorse, and I've come to accept that they are not. My peace didn't come from forgiving them. It came from accepting who they are and removing them from my life. They chose their narrative over their son, and I have chosen my truth over them. My relationship with Chloe exists, which is more than I ever thought possible. It's a quiet thing, built on carefully spaced texts and the occasional phone call. We don't talk about the past. We talk about her advocacy work, my exams, the silly things our aunts are up to. She is building a life of consequence, not as a tragic victim, but as a fierce advocate for others like her. I am proud of the woman she is choosing to become. The path back to each other is long, and maybe we'll never get all the way there, but for the first time we are at least walking in the same direction. Sometimes, when I'm walking across the university campus, I'll see a flash of my old self. The haunted, exhausted man who believed his life was a debt to be paid. I feel a profound sadness for him, for the 11 years he lost to a lie. But the sadness is quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Maya, who asked the question that changed everything. Gratitude for Aunt Carol, who found her courage. And gratitude for myself, for the man who, when pushed to the absolute brink, found the strength to fight back. The truth didn't just set me free from my parents. It set me free from the prison I had built for myself. It allowed me to finally stop atoning and start living. My life is my own. The past is a scar, a reminder of the battle I survived, but the future is an open, unwritten page. And for the first time, I can't wait to see what comes next. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever had to fight for a truth that everyone else wanted to keep buried? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.